Let's continue to read the biography of Isaiah Berlin, A Life by Michael Ignatieff. Chapter 17, Wolfson, 1966 to 1975. In the autumn of 1965, while Isaiah was at Princeton, he was telephoned by the Oxford Vice-Chancellor with an unlikely proposition. Would he consider becoming the first principal of Ely College? It was a new institution barely in existence, one of two created to provide homes for dons who taught in the Oxford faculties but did not have fellowships in existing colleges. Because they worked in subjects for which there was insufficient undergraduate teaching demand, some 2/3 of these dons were in medicine and the natural sciences. The rest were in various humanities disciplines, university administration, and the social sciences. Ely was also supposed to provide a home for graduate students in these disciplines. A theoretical chemist had been approached for the principalship, but he declined when the university declared itself unable to help raise the funds for a new college building. The new fellows of the college then suggested Berlin, but Ely hardly existed. The statutes setting it up had only been ratified in May. It had no purpose-built buildings of its own, just a converted family house, number 15, on the Banbury Road. The university had allocated a substantial site for a future college building, but it was far outside Oxford, and while 4 great Oxford colleges, Merton, All Souls, Christ Church, and St. John's, were stamping up funds to help with Ely's running costs in its early years, there was insufficient capital for a new building. On first impressions, Berlin thought Ely could never be more than a waste paper basket, where the university deposited faculty for whom no real college could find a place. Throughout the 1960s, the natural science faculties were growing. More graduate students were arriving, but Oxford wasn't responding adequately to these pressures. If something was not done, there would soon be too many people who, while teaching at Oxford, lacked proper college faculties of their own. It is not obvious why this issue should have mattered to Berlin. He had a little interest in science and certainly no close friendships among scientists. As for the social sciences, he was a long-standing skeptic. 12 years before, he had turned down one opportunity to become head of Oxford House, now Field College. Here was an offer to run a ragbag college out of a single stucco-fronted house on the Banbury Road. The proposition, on the face of it, seemed absurd. To the Vice-Chancellor's evident surprise, and perhaps to his own as well, Berlin said that he might consider it. He told Allen that he had the idea of turning it into a proper graduate college. On his return from the United States, he met a delegation of fellows, led by Frank Jessup, and discovered that they were his sort of people, unstuffy, intelligent, amusing, and on the issue of their exclusion from Oxford college life, properly indignant. When they complained of their treatment at other colleges, Isaiah found himself sympathetic for reasons intimately connected with his own memories of being an outsider. The excuses the scientists knew other colleges to be making: they work on labs, they don't come into college much, there's no room in the common room, sounded to him exactly like the excuses that rich nations offered in order to deny poor immigrants asylum. This meeting seems to have tipped the balance. As an expatriate, he had a particular understanding of belonging. The chance to create a new community for those who had none suddenly had a deep appeal. But remaining in 15 Banbury Road and running the college like a club for homeless scientists was not an option Berlin was prepared to consider. So he set one condition. If he couldn't raise the money within 6 months, the deal was off. When he heard that Berlin was considering Italy, the distinguished historian Alan Bullock said that he was being quixotic. The philosopher Herbert Hart thought that the job sounded repellent. Maurice Borra said he could not understand leaving the splendors of All Souls for a miserable house up the Banbury Road. William Hollister, warden of a new college, thought Berlin mad, and the Balliol philosophy fellow Marcos Dick exploded. The idea of your wasting your extraordinary gifts and your time taking college meetings and sitting on committees horrifies me. He had some explaining to do. He complained that he was tired of his professorship. Lecturing to undergraduates had become a burden, and he felt that he was too much of a historian for a chair whose proper center of gravity was political theory and philosophy. A professor of politics ought to propagate doctrine, he said, and he had none to propagate. Besides, there was no interest in the history of ideas in Oxford. He felt isolated and only found an echo for his ideas in America. Accordingly, if he could raise the money, his plan was to take the FLE job and continue with his professorship at the City University of New York for 1 term in every 6. He confessed to a pang at the thought of leaving All Souls and giving up his rooms with the beautiful view of the quad and the Radcliffe camera. But apart from that, he was ready to go. He was disillusioned by what he felt was the stagnant mediocrity settling over the college. When All Souls turned down a brilliant, if a difficult Austrian logician for a fellowship, Berlin felt that the college had sacrificed its intellectual standards. By the mid-1960s, the college was under increasing attack for failing to share its wealth with the university and for doing nothing for graduate teaching. Berlin believed that reform was long overdue. 3 options were possible. First, it could begin to accept graduate students and commit itself to graduate education. This proposal, which Berlin supported, went nowhere. A second possibility, a marriage between St. Antonius and All Souls, to create a Princeton-style Institute of Advanced Study at Oxford, was rebuffed by both colleges. The third option, which was to open up All Souls by offering visiting fellowships, found favor and went into operation in 1967. Sensing that All Souls would do nothing further for graduate education, Berlin seized on the FLE offer. It gave him a chance to found a graduate college on his own. As usual, he was lucky. The moment turned out to be extraordinarily propitious. It was already clear that Lord Frank's report into the state of education at Oxford, due to be published in June 1966, was going to recommend a substantial increase in Oxford's commitment to graduate education, especially in the sciences. Berlin had discussed its possible recommendations with his friend John Flood, who served on the Frank's commission. It now dawned on him that doing something for graduate students and for the non-dons, the faculty lecturers who didn't have college fellowships, might be a way to repay Oxford for what it had done for him. He wrote to Marcus Dick that if he could contribute something to Oxford of a concrete and a lasting nature, I should feel better about my life in general, better than if I had produced 3 good books. He said this in public, but in private he confessed, I have a secret desire to escape from something. I expect, although I rationalize it naturally, as the purest high-mindedness. What he was escaping from many have been the Romanticism project, whose looming afterline now began to seem daunting. If anything, his self-doubt as an intellectual had grown with the years. As he had confessed to a correspondent in 1963, I have not the slightest faith in anything I write myself. It is exactly like money. If you make it yourself, it seems a forgery. Running a college offered a creditable escape, yet it would be wrong to see the next decade as an exercise in flight or sublimation. Like many intellectuals, Berlin longed to prove his capacity for practical business. After a lifetime of consciously evading responsibility, he was seeking it now and on risky terms, not taking over established Oxford House, but founding one from scratch. The first problem to overcome was the Effley site, which was too small and 2 miles from town. A site had to be found closer to Oxford if donors were to be attracted, and if the college were to become a real part of the university. Once again, Berlin's luck held. In November, just as he was conditionally accepting the Effley offer, the Hardin family agreed to sell the university their lease on a 9-acre site at the end of Linton Road in North Oxford. After some politicking, the site was made available to the new college. The Hardin home, a large brick pile in which the scientist John Scott Hardin had conducted his first World War experiments on the impact of poison gases on human respiration, would have to be demolished and a new building erected on the sloping meadows and marshes that led down to the river Cherwell. But where was the money to be found? Berlin had never raised money in his life. It was time to use his connections. First, he made contact with McGeorge Bundy, then just about to take over as president of the Ford Foundation. He had known Bundy since Harvard, and they had kept in touch when Bundy was at the White House. Berlin had great respect for Bundy as an administrator and as an advisor of presidents. But his candid assessment to Maurice Borra in 1963 had been that he clearly does not mind walking over corpses. This was all right, Berlin added, provided that the corpse was not his own. His appeal to the Ford Foundation played on American nobles' oblige towards the faltering British ally. A new college was necessary to prevent the brain drain of Britain's biased scientists and scholars. It was needed to renew Oxford itself. These were persuasive arguments, but the most persuasive of all was Berlin himself. His presence made the proposal intellectually respectable. As Ford later made clear, Isaiah's involvement was the sine qua non of their decision to get involved. Once again, Berlin's timing and luck was uncanny. As an incoming president, Bundy enjoyed a honeymoon with his trustees, which allowed him to get his way. By February 1966, Bundy had committed Ford to the project, provided matching funds from a British donor could be found. As the most respected Jewish figure in British intellectual life, Berlin knew that the doors of Jewish philanthropy were open to him. He marched straight through the most imposing door of all to Sir Isaac Wolfson, founder-president of a great Universal Stores. Wolfson was a shrewd and pious Glaswegian, full of a joke and vitality, who had made a large fortune by dint of enormous flair and acumen in the retail trade and mail order. The Wolfson Foundation had existed since 1955 and had already made substantial grants to the Oxbridge colleges. Its founder had now reached the stage where he wanted to set the seal on his university benefactions. Isaac Wolfson reminded Isaiah of a great medieval merchant prince, while his son Leonard seemed a modern man of business, punctilious, if silent and inscrutable. At his first lunch at the Rees with Leonard Wolfson, Isaiah laid out the prospect of being associated in a joint venture with the greatest American foundation. Wolfson said that there was to be one condition. Everly would have to be called Wolfson College. Berlin immediately agreed, and he remembered saying, "If you want your name immortalized, a college will do it better than a hospital." Wolfson College really will be immortal. By February 1966, Isaiah and Leonard Wolfson had tentatively agreed, subject to the approval of their board. Euphoria proved short-lived. Word reached Isaac Wolfson that Anthony Crossland, Secretary of State for Education in the Labor government, believed that the money should be going to the red brick universities instead. Sir Solly Zuckerman, Chief Scientific Advisor to the government, a professor at Birmingham and a member of the Wolfson Foundation Board, also argued that the money should be channeled away from Oxbridge. The irony was that Zuckerman's resentment at Oxford may have owed something to the fact that as a young university demonstrator in anatomy, he had been one of those non-dons who had not been elected to a college fellowship. This did not make him any less ferocious opponent of the very project that proposed to remedy the injustice he felt he had suffered. His opposition proved formidable, especially because Oxford as a whole was on the defensive in the egalitarian ethos of the times. Isaiah was frankly exasperated as he confessed to a friend, quote, "It is impossible to convey in America the full degree of prejudice against Oxford and Cambridge in the present Labour government. equality is a noble idea, and in its interests, Oxford and Cambridge require reform. But when a desire for social justice takes resentful and emotional forms, it leads to repression and gratuitous damage rather than reform." End quote. To Lord Franks, then completing his report on the university, Isaiah wrote, "The fashion is for egalitarianism, where it can well be fatal. The proposed college would be like a Covent Garden," Berlin said, "a national center of excellence. But like all such centers, it was bound to provoke the ire of a certain type of egalitarian social democrat. In fact, Berlin's plans were themselves egalitarian. There was to be no high table. Spouses would have a common room rise. There would be a creche for children and family living quarters. The fellowship was to be a genuine democracy." But in the winter of 1966, this was all in the domain of pious intentions. The risk was that the Wolfson Foundation would pull out of the project altogether. To save the college, Berlin had to call on reserves of a political acumen that his friends never suspected. He mobilized all the Oxford heads of houses, together with 2 Nobel Prize-winning scientists, Sir John Cockroft of Cambridge and Lord Florey, Provost of Queen's, behind the proposed college. Then he sought out Crossland and succeeded in changing his mind. Finally, knowing how much difference it would make it to the Wolfson if the Prime Minister himself, Harold Wilson, were known to approve, Berlin contacted Thomas Barlow, Wilson's chief economic advisor, and asked him to put in a good word. Let's stop here for the first part of this chapter.